of modelling to show the potential impact of a national minimum wage. Government has basically committed to introducing a minimum wage to protect the most vulnerable of workers. Those opposed, the critics, say it will be just another reason for companies already under pressure not to hire. So let's get a sense of what the data says. We're joined by the coordinator of the National Wage Research Initiative at Wits, Gilad Isaacs. Great to have you with us.
Evening, thanks very much.
So let's start with the bad news, because there is this fear that it will create more unemployment, which we need like a hole in the head. And your research finds that it will do that, but not to a significant extent. Just tell me about it.
Excellent, thanks. So this is the output of our modelling exercise. And interestingly, it chimes very well with the international evidence. And the international evidence shows that minimum wages have a minimal, negligible, or statistically insignificant impact on employment. And what we see when we look at the economy on aggregate, and it's a much better exercise to look at the economy on aggregate than to try and look only at certain sectors. And what we see is that wages increase, which increases disposable income, which has a positive impact on output and on GDP growth. We do see that there's a slight negative impact on employment. We measure this against a baseline scenario, which says if we don't do anything differently to how we are now, what might occur. And we see that the unemployment rate is 0.1 or 0.2% higher in our scenarios.
Okay, so it's fractional. The difference is fractional. On the other hand, there's a lot of good news. It will be good for growth, good for inequality. How will it be good for those things?
Okay, great. In terms of on the GDP output and growth side, we see that an increase in domestic expenditure, which will arise from rising wages, can have a positive impact. The international evidence, which we've also looked at, does show that minimum wages have a positive impact on inequality and on poverty. And that was also part of the output which we saw from our modelling, that in all scenarios we see a decrease in poverty and inequality from our baseline business as usual scenario.
So people earn more, they can spend more. It's that whole knock-on effect. They encourage companies, things like that. Many people say we already have a minimum wage because we have these sectoral determinations. We have minimum wages for domestic workers, for security guards. Do we need an overall minimum wage?
No, I mean it's an excellent point. Our system now, as you say, is sectoral, and it's either set by government or collective bargaining. And the International Labour Organization advocates for a national minimum wage, one wage floor under which no one can earn. What we see on a sectoral level is that it's not covering everybody. It generally is lower in sectors of marginalized like workers, so like youth and women. It is harder to enforce because it is fragmented. And when we think about setting it, we think only about the impact and dynamics of a sector, opposed to thinking about what the aggregate impact may be on the economy.
That's interesting. So it'll help to prevent people fall through the cracks, basically.
Absolutely. I mean, it depends. The impact is obviously hinges in many ways on the level and various other policy issues of how it's set and enforced, etc.
I see you've got different scenarios. So one, 2,250 a month, going all the way up to 6,000 Rand as a minimum. You've looked at percentages of the average. Can we say this is the optimal level for South Africa?
I think that modelling and forecasting exercises offer us insight. They don't offer us a crystal ball. The economy may evolve in all sorts of unexpected ways. But what we do is we measure from like a minimalist to like a maximalist, and then two scenarios which index and gradually increase. And what we see is that process of gradually increasing might be a way in which we can set levels which will account for people's basic needs, which is the idea, but also allow time for the economy to adjust.
So if we started, would you think it would be at about that level, 2,250?
The OECD average is around 40% of the average wage, which is higher. Depending on what average you're looking at, it's somewhere between 3,600 and 4,600. Okay. A meaningful national minimum wage needs to be set at a level above what our sectoral determinations are now. If we simply say we will set this at the same level of our lowest minimum wage now, then besides for incorporating some extra workers, we're not really altering either wages or the economy.
All right, so this is good to know as South Africa moves towards a minimum wage, that the data actually is for it. And thank you for your analysis. That was Gilad Isaacs from Wits University. And that's it from the business desk. I'll be back with updates throughout Prime. No, see you shortly.